Okay, so I have now knitted two together all the way around, and we are ready to actually do the final closing up of the top of our hat. So we want to give ourselves a nice, I'm going to give it a little bit more than a foot. That's going to be way plenty yarn, but it's better to have plenty to work with. Cut your yarn away from the ball and actually out of two skeins, 250-gram balls of yarn, I should say. This is the little piece that I had left over, and so it does take just about the full 250-gram balls for the adult hat. All right, now a needle. You can use a tapestry needle, which is kind of a more of a dull pointed needle on the end. This is actually, you get at the knit shop. It has a little curve to it on the end here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but well, if I got it under the camera here, you could see it. This works really well for a lot of the knitting, finishing, sewing seams together. Important not to use a sharp point. You don't want to split your yarn. You don't want to go into the yarn itself when you're sewing together. You really want to try to get through the loop, just like what you are into the stitch, just like when you were knitting. And that's important for this next step also, because we're going to run this back through these stitches here, and we're going to take our knitting needle off. So just like you were using this point, we're going to use the point of our needle now. And you have your yarn coming from the back here, and we're going to pick up, just slip those stitches off. I'm putting them here on my needle. I'm going to run this all the way around, so that part of the needle's done. I'm going to pull my thread through. I'm not going to snug it up real tight yet. Pull my needle back here, this long cable, and go to picking up these last few stitches. Okay, our needle is totally off, and I should say the knitting needle is, and I'm pulling through my yarn up through those last stitches, and I'm closing it up. We don't want a hole there. And look what a nice finish to this hat. I love that. I think this is a very, very attractive hat. I'll lay it down here. It has just a nice gentle curve. Remember on our pattern it gave the finishing for two different crowns. This one's more rounded. I've not made the other one. It's more pointed. I'm sure it's a great hat too, and I'll probably make that just for the fun of it. But you can see these lines here. Those are our decrease lines, and that's where we had two knit stitches together. And it just gives a nice finish to the hat. It's part of the design, and I think it looks really, really good. So let's come back up here to where our closure is, right here. I know this is dark, kind of hard to see, but now we've run the yarn through there once. I'm going to run it a second time. So this is where my yarn left off. I'm going to go back and make sure you run it in the correct direction. You don't want to run it backwards, you'll be feeding it out. Try to go through the stitch itself and not break the yarn, not feed into the yarn. Try to get into the stitch itself. And that brings us back. So now our yarn is through that twice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to feed our yarn through to the inside part of our hat. It's going to be tricky to keep me on the camera, and see how nice that finishes off. Looks really no yarn bumps sticking out there. Now we're going to turn our hat inside out because we're not done yet. Come up to the very point of our crown. Here's our yarn. And now we're going to just, not just in the row of stitches that we were just working with, but the next row around, and I'm just going to start feeding this end tail through. Some of these stitches don't go through to the front side, just pick up the bump that's on the back side, still trying to stay in a stitch versus feeding it through a yarn. That's where this dull point really helps stay picking up some of these bumps, the purl bump to feed into. And just in this case, I'm just going around in a circle, and I'm going to do one more round. You can see where you just were, it had a little raised edge, and now I'm going to go out the next round outside of that. Hold this up here. Hopefully you can get a good view of what this is looking like. And because this is a bulkier yarn, you can kind of see more clearly where that ridge is. But I'm still just going around in a circle, weaving in this end, and I think that's enough. And we're just gonna not go right up against the yarn, but close, and then I'm just going to give it a little pull, just a little pull, and there's that nice finished edge. The other thing, while I'm still in here, these are the two ends that I wove in, and I've not cut them off, so I'm going to give myself about a quarter of an inch, half inch little tag there, pull just a little bit. After wearing that little end, I just don't like to totally, cut it up to the very edge. I don't want that to flip through to the other side. So I leave myself just a little bit, and from just wearing, that's going to blend right in. And it's on the inside. So now, let's turn our hat back to the front side. And we have one little more piece to finish here. Get my computer back on so I can make sure I can see that I'm in the camera still. That's always kind of tricky in making these videos. So we have this edge to finish off, and I explained earlier that we have a jog here because that's our cast on edge, and when you come all the way around and you start knitting another row, you obviously get a jog because you've started a second row. And how do we get rid of that? Well, I want to bring my yarn, this yarn tail, weave it in to the stitch right back here. I don't want to weave it in here because we won't get rid of that jog. So I'm going to bring my needle from the front side, and I want to go through to the back side, and I want to make sure that I get into this stitch right here and pull down to the back side, and see, it just closes that up beautifully. I'll get that here. You cannot really, if I don't point it out, it would be hard to see where that edge is, and I'll show you where it is. It's right there. So now our yarn is back here, and I want to do one more little loop right there just to secure it. Okay, now that's pretty tight, it's not floppy. What do we do with all the rest of this? Our first inkling is sometimes maybe to run it this way, to bury it on the back side here, but every time that hat is put on, you're going to put tension this way. So my recommendation is run it up a column, not across. By running it up a column, every time you put this on, you're not putting stress on this yarn to pull it in the same way that it would get stretched this way. So choose the column that you're in and where the yarn is, and just I go every stitch up, and because remember, we want this brim to be able to turn up. Now, if you knew it was always going to be worn up, you actually could run your yarn up on the front side. But that's kind of debatable, isn't it? You're going to lose one way or the other, or win one side or the other. I'm just going to go ahead and run it up this back side, and I'm actually picking up the leg of one side of the knit stitch, and I'm not going across, so there's, it's going to be buried in this column, and it's going to be pretty hard to find, especially with the yarn that I'm using, because it's a tweed. It's going to really camouflage that, and you don't have to go a super long ways, but I would do at least an inch. And you see, when I snug that, once we cut this off, that is going to be almost impossible to see. If you were going across the, get back here in the camera, if you were going across this way, you would see it as you crossed over from column to column. So I'm going to just do one more stitch or two, and it just kind of buries down inside that leg of that knit. It does not show from the front side at all, because I'm not coming through onto this side. I'm just keeping it on the back side of this knit leg right there. Now I'm going to clip that off, and in this case I'm going to clip it. I'm not going to leave a little tail out there. Just going to have a lot of faith that that's going to stay right there and will just blend in and not be an issue. And even though I had to use two different yarns, I actually think it kind of turned out okay. And I think it's a super hat. It's a warm hat with the particular yarn that I've chosen. And I hope you're happy with your first hat project. So there you go. Thank you to I'm going to give her credit here on this hat that we downloaded. I thought there was, I'm not seeing the name of the person that actually wrote this. We got it off of Ravelry. Stadkin Knits, I think is what, but I don't see a person's name. But this is a terrific pattern. And the other thing that I want to bring to your last thing, when we added our yarn here, you learned how to put two skeins together. Well, think about it. If you wanted to make a striped hat, you do the same process and just decide however wide you want your stripes to be, and you just add a new skein, knit however many rows of that color you want. I mean, you could have 5 or 6 colors striped if you wanted to. And so you would do it in the same way that we added the second ball of yarn. So that's how you can make a striped yarn if you have several colors of yarn that are all the same weight or close to the same weight. So have fun with that. I hope this video was helpful. If it was and you've followed along, leave a little message for me. That would be fun to know. I see that I can see the views, but I would love to know your thoughts and if this was helpful. And if you had any questions about it, please make the comment and I'll watch for them. Thank you so much for watching. Bye now.